Hey, Curtis Fry with Fly Fish Food, and if you're a beginner or just want to get into fly fishing, we're going to talk about the 5 biggest things when it comes to selecting your first fly rod.
Dude, that's a big round,
Okay, if you are just starting out, you probably asked yourself the question, what fly rod should I get? So not only will we get to a list of some of our favorite options for beginners at the end of the video, I'm going to walk you through some of the things, the most important things that you need to look for when you're going to buy that first fly rod. And so by the end of the video, you should have a list of things to look for and a list of good fly rods to consider as you begin your journey into fly fishing. The first thing that I would recommend that you look at is going to be your budget. With that said, a lot of people will say, don't spend a lot of money getting into fly fishing. And I would say in general, that's probably true. So if you're going to get into it and you're just not sure, even if you want to spend any money at all, I would hit up a friend or somebody that you know that fishes and borrow their rod. Go out with them, kind of get a feel for what it's going to be like without outlaying any cash to begin with. That's probably the biggest option, the biggest advantage of going that option. Now, secondarily, I would say if your budget allows to splurge a little on a fly rod, that's typically going to be a fairly good investment when it comes to getting into the sport. And we'll get to that towards the end of the video. But for now, I would say decide what your budget is. And again, if your budget is not going to allow you to buy even a $100 rod, probably going to be better off borrowing from somebody. That said, we will give you some really good options for budget-friendly rods. And then I will also get into one of the reasons why I would say a more expensive rod can often be better for beginners. But we'll circle back around to that. Okay, the second thing on my list is if you're going to spend money on any product in fly fishing or anything else for that matter, you want to make sure that that company that you buy that from either has a good warranty or they're somewhere in the vicinity that you can get somebody either on the phone or take something back. So if you do have problems with the product, that is a big consideration. So the rods that we're going to talk about today typically all have either very good warranties or they are US or local based companies that you can work with if you have issues with the product. I would say that because let's say you go to some off-brand that's imported and that doesn't have a really strong presence in the state or most likely the country, we're here in the US, where you live, you might end up finding yourself up a creek without a rod. Dad joke alert. And so I would just say be cognizant. There are some brands that will offer pretty good warranties even on their beginner or budget-friendly rods. So that's something to pay attention to. Warranties and how do you get help if something goes wrong, as well as the long-term viability of the company that you're going to buy from. You don't want to fly by night because that fly by night might be gone in the morning. So keep that in mind. Okay, the next item that I would say as a beginner you need to consider is the function of your fly rod. So if you live next to some really small streams and consequently maybe some smallerish trout or panfish, I would not recommend getting a very heavy rod. Budget is a different conversation, but when it comes to functionality, you need to look at what you're going to be fishing, types of flies, type of fish, cover, terrain, any of those things will probably help you more than a lot of things in determining which rod to buy. So with fly rods, and we do have some other videos that kind of break that down as far as what does a weight mean on a fly rod. But by and large, and if you are confused, just kind of consult somebody in your area that might know the types of rods that would be more conducive to where you're going to be fishing. And then also, sometimes just as importantly, the types of flies that you would be fishing. A lot of times, if you're going to be fishing some bigger flies, even on a smaller body of water, you may want to up your fly rod to a different weight. So by and large, most of the rods that people are going to begin with are going to be kind of your 9-foot 5-weight. And that one will fish still waters to small streams. But like I said, if you have different considerations based on where you live and where you're going to fish, you want to look at that and the function. And that, again, is going to be determined by, if you don't know, by somebody you know. Ask them kind of what's the best style of fly rod. And that, again, is going to be independent of the brand. It's going to be independent of the price for the most part. So if you live out somewhere on the coast and you're going to be fishing either in the flats or even shoreline fishing in the ocean. It's a much different conversation than if you were fishing for small bluegill in a farm pond in Kansas. So that's something that you want to be aware of and dig into before you purchase your rod. Okay, the fourth consideration would be what the rod is specifically designed for and how it will perform. By this, we're kind of edging into what I would call the justification for a higher end rod. So I know you can go probably down to Walmart or your local pick and save, whatever sporting goods store that you have, and you will probably find fly rods that are much cheaper than anything that we carry here in this fly shop or any fly shop for that matter. And there's a reason for that. So I would say if your goal is to save money, probably not a great option to get into fly fishing. But there are ways to do it as long as you follow some of these things that we're talking about today. So at the end of the day, a fly rod is designed to cast a fly line and hopefully accurately to where the destination of this is going to be. So if you see a fish over there and you cast a fly at that fish, you want the fly to land accurately where you're intending it to land. And you want, as soon as it delivers its payload, you want that thing to settle down and be ready to engage with fish. What you don't want is you don't want that rod to be just wiggling out there and going crazy after you cast. As you spend more money on a fly rod, and this is typical, it's not always going to be the case. Typically, the more you spend on a fly rod, there's going to be more design and research going into that fly rod, as well as the components and subsequently that performance to get that rod to do as much as you can. I would say, and my argument would be, if a company could design a high-end fly rod that is maybe they have a cheap one, a middle one, and a high-end fly rod. The low-end fly rod is certainly not going to be designed with the same parameters as the high-end fly rod. So a lot of people will say, oh, it's this $1,000 fly rod, you cannot justify that. Well, I will say that you obviously can justify because they wouldn't make them if they didn't sell. But secondarily, there is a matter of design and functionality that goes into that with respect to how that fly rod performs. With that said, I'm not saying to a beginner, go out and buy a $1,000 fly rod. However, if you were to spend maybe more than an entry-level fly rod, you're probably going to get the most bang for the buck because those rods are going to perform at maybe an additional level above what you would get with the beginner rod. And as proof of that, I have taken beginners out and I've put a very expensive fly rod in their hand versus a not very expensive fly rod, and I still have yet to find one person who told me they liked the lower end rod above the upper end, and that's a blind test. They don't have any idea what the fly rod would cost. Now, that's not always going to be the case. Your mileage may vary, let's say. But I would say that if you are going to spend a little bit extra money above, say, a beginner or entry-level fly rod, you're probably going to see some gains there. Now, at the same time, I would say that if you are spending, you want to keep that budget in control as you get your first fly rod, that's great. Maybe your second fly rod, or it could be turning your first one into a backup and then upgrade. Most of the people that I've talked to as they upgrade tend to say, yeah, I like the performance. It's either lighter in hand, it settles down and recovers a lot quicker, or whatever the case may be. Again, there's research and design money being spent on those higher end fly rods. They're not doing it just to suck money out of our wallets. It may seem that way, but absolutely not the case. So that would be a consideration. If you have the budget, you may want to go a little ways up on the price to kind of give you that middle ground. And I'll talk about some of those rods that fit that in a minute. And so the final and fifth thing to consider, and that is going to be our list of recommended fly rods for beginners. And I would say that list is going to largely be dominated by kits. So when I say a kit, it basically means it's got the fly rod with it. It usually has a reel, a line, and often it's going to have leader and tippet tied onto it. So if you just want to hit the ground running, my recommendation to you is to get an all-in-one kit. Some of my favorites right now are the Lamson Liquid Kit. Lamson, traditionally known for making really, really good reels. They also make great fly rods. And now you put those two together, you've got a really nice kit. In this case, right around $300. That includes everything you will need to fish. So kits are going to be good. I also like the Orvis Clearwater. That would be still probably considered an entry-level kit. The Orvis Encounter kit is similar. It's a little less expensive, not as great a performance as, say, the Clearwater. And then one of our favorites as well would be the Echo Lift. Those come in kits as well. There is a new rod. If you're watching this video between the end of January 2025 and February 3rd, 25, you cannot buy this, but Redington has a new budget rod. In fact, most of Redington's rods I would consider budget, but they are so good for the money, as well as these other ones that I've mentioned. But the Redington EDC, the Redington Everyday Carry Rod, which will be released on February 3rd, 2025, is also going to be another one of those that I would say is kind of a higher performance for what you pay in the money. And it's going to retail for around 300-ish, 320. That would be a good one to use. Now, if you're looking to spend a little bit more money, I would say, again, best bang for the buck for a beginner, if you have the budget, would probably be your mid-range rods. Things like the Orvis Recon, the G Loomis IMX Pro 2, great one. And then Lamson also has the Velocity rod, and there's some ones that will fit it in that kind of mid-range, as well as the Sage Foundation. Now, there are some other ones that would probably be considered in that range. Those are the ones we're sticking to here for this list. It absolutely does not mean that there are other rods that could be just as good as these ones. These are our top picks based on what we like to fish and based on what we see flowing out of the shop as we sell both online and in our 2 stores. To summarize, if you are a beginner and you want to get into fly fishing, these are some great things to keep in mind, some great rod options. We're going to list those down in the description below. If you have any questions on what to consider, drop a comment. We'll answer them as best we can. And any of this, you can just check us out at flyfishfood.com. Most importantly is get into the sport, get your rod, and get out there and fish.